Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever noticed how funny it is that when one person refuses to kneel, the entire town suddenly becomes a choir of critics? Every shopkeeper, every neighbor, every so-called friend, they all start humming the same little tune, "Take them down." But you didn't break. You didn't even blink. They threw gossip, lies, pity parties, and pity looks. Oh, they tried everything. They whispered in corners, they smiled in your face, and sharpened their knives behind your back. But somehow, you walked through the middle of their storm wearing that same calm face. Didn't you? They couldn't believe it. How could one person stand against a crowd? Because they've never met someone who's already made peace with their pain. You were the scandal they couldn't bury, the fire they couldn't put out, the echo they couldn't silence. Every attack became applause in disguise, and every insult only made your story a little more legendary. They united against your strength, but underestimated your silence. Isn't that beautiful? A crowd can scream, shout, and scheme, but silence is terrifying. You didn't need to argue, explain, or defend. You just watched. And that drove them insane. They mistook your quiet for weakness, thought your stillness meant surrender. They didn't realize silence was your weapon, the kind that slices through noise without making a sound. They gathered in corners, cooked up plans, built alliances out of jealousy and fear. They told themselves they were standing for something righteous, something noble. But deep down, they just couldn't stand the sight of someone who didn't need them. You became their mirror, and what they saw was everything they wished they could be. So they attacked it. They called you cold, arrogant, ungrateful. But really, you were just free. They need a crowd to feel powerful. You only needed purpose. They needed witnesses to feel alive. You only needed truth. That's why they lost. Because when they fought you, they weren't fighting one person. They were fighting every insecurity they ever buried. You just stood there, calm, collected, quiet, while their noise echoed into exhaustion. That's the secret they'll never understand. Real power doesn't need to prove itself. It just exists. Like a storm before thunder, like calm before chaos, like silence before revelation. And when the dust settles, the one who said nothing ends up being the only one left standing. Fear disguised as hate. Their coordination was born from insecurity. You could see it, couldn't you? The way their eyes twitched when you walked in, the way their voices trembled, pretending to sound bold. It wasn't hate. It was fear wearing a louder mask. They feared what they couldn't control, what they couldn't understand, what they could never be. And instead of facing that fear, they decided to call it hatred. That's what people do when the truth makes them uncomfortable. They rename it, reshape it, hide it behind noise. They found each other because misery always finds company. One person's insecurity becomes another's excuse. And suddenly, they all have a common enemy. You. They needed someone to blame, to point at, to chase, because if they didn't, they'd have to face themselves. Their coordination wasn't strength. It was desperation, dressed up as unity. They built their alliance out of fragile egos and unspoken jealousy, thinking numbers would make them powerful. But fear doesn't turn into power when shared. It only multiplies. You became their shadow, haunting them not because you tried to, but because your existence reminded them of everything they were too afraid to do. You dared to stand alone, and that single act shook their illusion of control. They mistook courage for arrogance, confidence for rebellion, truth for threat. So they came together, hoping that by breaking you, they'd quiet the voice in their own heads whispering, "You could have been like that too." That's what fear does. It imitates hate, it copies rage, it dresses up in self-righteousness and calls itself justice. But behind all the noise, the shaking hands, the fake smiles, the truth remains simple. They didn't hate you for who you are. They feared you for what you exposed. The price of individuality is exile from mediocrity. The moment you decided to think differently, to walk your own path, you became a stranger to the crowd. They don't celebrate difference. They tolerate it until it threatens their comfort. The world teaches conformity as safety. Wear the same mask, speak the same words, follow the same script. But you refused, and for that they labeled you difficult, strange, unpredictable. They couldn't understand why you wouldn't shrink to fit their small ideas. They mistook your independence for rebellion, your uniqueness for arrogance. But the truth is, individuality comes with isolation. When you stop living by approval, you stop belonging to their little club of comfort. They'll whisper, distance themselves, maybe even try to shame you back into sameness, because your freedom offends them. Your difference reminds them of everything they've buried, their wild dreams, their lost courage, their silenced voice. You became a walking reminder that mediocrity is a choice, not a destiny. So they'll exile you, not because you're wrong, but because your light exposes their dimness. That's the cruel trade. When you choose authenticity over acceptance, the world will first punish you before it learns to respect you. They'll turn cold, they'll make you doubt yourself, they'll call your solitude failure. But deep down, even as they mock, they envy that kind of peace. You don't need their permission to exist. You never did. They chose comfort, you chose truth, and that's the divide that keeps you apart. To stand alone means to stand outside their limits, outside their understanding, outside their approval. It means walking roads where no applause follows, no crowd cheers, no map exists. That's the cost of being real in a world addicted to imitation. And only the brave ever pay it willingly. King. Betrayal teaches clarity better than loyalty ever could. It's strange, isn't it? How the sharpest lessons come wrapped in the ugliest moments. Loyalty makes you comfortable, but betrayal makes you awake. You start to see things you ignored before. The cracks in smiles, the hesitation in voices, the rehearsed kindness that always felt a little too polished. When someone betrays you, the world stops pretending. Masks fall. You stop believing in words and start listening to patterns. You realize that loyalty isn't rare because people don't care. It's rare because truth terrifies them. Betrayal strips away the illusions you built around others. And even worse, the lies you told yourself. You thought they'd stay. You thought they'd mean it. You thought you mattered in the same way you gave. But when they turn, when they twist the knife you never saw coming, something inside you shifts. The naivety burns away. The fog clears. You see them and yourself without filters. You stop chasing explanations and start studying behavior. You stop asking why me and start understanding, of course, them. It's cruel education, but it's real. Loyalty never forces you to grow. It keeps you safe, blind in comfort. Betrayal forces you to evolve, to sharpen, to discern. It teaches you the value of silence, of distance, of watching before trusting. It teaches you that love without boundaries becomes permission for pain. And when you finally see clearly, when your eyes adjust to the harsh light of truth, you stop needing closure. You stop romanticizing loyalty that never existed. You start building peace from the pieces they left behind with a new kind of strength. One that doesn't crave validation, one that recognizes faces for what they are, not for what you hoped they'd be. And your survival embarrassed their collective effort. They had plans, didn't they? Detailed, whispered, well coordinated. Every rumor, every smirk, every little betrayal, all perfectly timed to crush you, collapse, to confirm the story they built in their minds about how fragile you really were. But you didn't break. You didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing you crumble. And that's what humiliated them. They tried to bury you in doubt, in shame, in silence. But you kept breathing, walking, existing. That's the kind of defeat that stings. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. They spent all their energy crafting your downfall. And you turned it into your awakening. Your endurance became a mirror reflecting their failure back at them. You didn't fight the way they expected. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You didn't scream. You simply survived. And that alone destroyed their narrative. Because for people, nothing hurts more than someone who refuses to die where they wanted them to. Every time you smiled again, every time you rose again, every time you simply continued, you proved their unity turned into silence, their confidence into guilt. You became a living contradiction to their story. Proof that pain doesn't always end in destruction. And the ones who tried to bury you forgot you were a seed. They thought the dirt would hide you, that silence would smother you, that isolation would end you. They mistook your stillness for defeat, your absence for disappearance. They didn't understand that darkness doesn't always mean death. Sometimes it's preparation. You see, when they threw you into the ground, they believed they were ending a story, but they were really planning a beginning. The pressure, the cold, the loneliness, it all became the soil that reshaped you. You didn't fight to escape. You grew, quietly, patiently, without asking for permission or applause. That's what they'll never grasp. Real strength doesn't perform, it transforms. While they celebrated your downfall, you were evolving beneath their feet. Every insult became a layer of resilience, every rejection a root, every humiliation a lesson. You didn't just survive their burial, you used it. You let the darkness teach you things the light never could. Growth doesn't happen under praise. So they covered you with lies, hoping to erase your name. But those lies became fertilizer for truth. Every attempt to silence you only made your voice more certain. They expected your story to end in whispers, but it returned in thunder. You didn't crawl back. You rose. Not the same, not softer, but stronger, sharper, unshakable. And when you finally broke through the surface, the same people who buried you had to face the garden they accidentally created. That's the irony of it all. In trying to destroy you, they gave you everything you needed to become unstoppable. They never expected you to adapt. They thought pain would weaken you, but it taught you patience. They thought loss would hollow you, but it created space for purpose. They thought you'd drown in the dirt, but you learned to breathe underground. They measured your worth by your visibility, never realizing that power often grows when no one's watching. You learned to grow without validation, to bloom without applause, to thrive without sunlight. And that's why you're dangerous now, because they can't take credit for what you've become. Mems, the dirt they threw wasn't punishment, it was protection. It kept you hidden until you were ready. It shielded you while you gathered your strength, while your roots learned how deep they could go. That's the secret of every seed. It breaks before it blooms. You had to shatter to sprout, to lose your old shape to find your real form. They thought breaking you was victory, but it was your transformation. When you emerged again, taller, brighter, unstoppable, they couldn't comprehend how something they buried could rise so high. Their confusion became your triumph, and you didn't need revenge. Your growth was enough. You didn't need to shout your comeback. Your presence said everything, because the seed that survives the burial doesn't return as the same small thing. It returns multiplied. You grew roots where they expected ruin, and branches where they left emptiness. You became a living reminder that pressure doesn't destroy purpose. It reveals it. They tried to cover you, contain you, control you, but you were never meant to stay underground. They mistook your silence for surrender, but silence is where strength learns to speak. So you rose, not to prove them wrong, but to prove that nothing, not betrayal, not pain, not darkness, can stop what's destined to grow.